Today on Legally Us, animal control investigating Shannon Beador after her hit and run. Joe and Sophie reach a temporary agreement as Clayton Echard is hit with a paternity lawsuit. Plus, Kourtney Kardashian's poosh problem, and Kim Zolciak wants the divorce called off. We've got that plus so much more in today's Legally Us. Hey everyone, and welcome to Legally Us. I'm Christina. That's of course Neama Rahmani, President and CEO of West Coast Trial Lawyers. Hi Neama, how are you?
Great, Christina. How are you?
I am good. We have a lot of news to get to. Kicking it off with Shannon Beador. So animal control is now getting involved after her DUI and hit and run investigation. So the Newport Beach Police Department told Us Weekly, we are looking into if there were any issues or cruelty related to her dog. There are no animal endangerment laws, but there are animal cruelty laws, and we are looking at it. So of course, like we talked about last week, she was arrested for a DUI and hit and run, and her dog Archie was in the car with her. And she was driving erratically. She hit somebody's property. And afterwards, she exited the vehicle with Archie when police arrived in an alleged attempt to make it seem like she was walking her pet. So what kind of animal cruelty laws would they be looking into?
Christina, I have a lot of respect for law enforcement. My parents still live in Newport Beach, but this is an example of they should leave the lawyering to the lawyers and prosecutors. There's no animal cruelty laws that were broken here. I mean, DUIs are the most common crime in the country. And think of all the people that have dogs and have dogs in their cars when they're driving under the influence. Imagine if all those dogs were taken from their owners. Not going to happen. Shannon is not going to be prosecuted for anything but DUI and hit and run. Obviously, we all care for animals, but this is not an animal cruelty case. Animal cruelty requires intent or malice. You got to do something with purpose. And that's not what happened here. Someone who obviously purposely got behind the wheel of a car after she was drinking alcohol, but didn't intend to put her dog in danger. Obviously, it would be different if you have kids in the car. Children can be taken from their parents if they're driving under the influence, but nothing's going to happen to Shannon's dog.
Good. So what do you think her attorneys are advising her to do at the moment? She has stayed quiet. She hasn't, said anything publicly about this. Is she just kind of letting this play out? And what do you think her attorneys are advising her to do?
Her attorneys are advising her to plead and work out some sort of mitigation. It's not a defensible case. She's driving. She's involved in a single car accident. She crashes into a home, and then she's, gets out and acts like she's walking the dog. So not only did she drive under the influence, crash, she fled the scene of the accident by walking away. So not a case that you can defend in court. This is going to be a plea bargain, and they're going to try to get as little in terms of a penalty as they can for their client.
All right, moving right along to Joe Jonas and Sophie Turner. They came to a temporary agreement about their children after days of public battling over where their daughter should live. So they signed a temporary consent agreement saying they will not take their kids outside of the New York City area for now. So, of course, they filed the agreement with a federal judge, and it comes just days after she filed a lawsuit against Joe, accusing him of wrongfully detaining their children in New York City. They share two young daughters, both under 3 and under. So what other things could they have agreed upon in this temporary consent agreement? And are you surprised that they came to an agreement so soon?
Christina, I'm not surprised. And we talked about this case just a few days ago, and it really de-escalated quickly because, frankly, Sophie didn't have a good case. The kids were born in the United States. They're American citizens. They've spent most of their time here in the United States. So for her to file a lawsuit and say that, the proper domicile is the UK, that's going to be a tough legal burden for her to overcome. And, at the end of the day, I think they realize that as much as we like covering these cases here on Legally Us, these types of divorces, the nasty ones, are not good for the children. So I'm not surprised they came to a temporary resolution. Now, this doesn't bind any of them permanently. Of course, Sophie can ask the court at some point to, take the kids to the UK and have them reside there permanently, but it's not going to be resolved on some emergency basis when the kids have spent their whole life in Florida and in New York.
Right. So why New York City and not Florida? Because Joe filed in Florida. she filed that he wrongfully detained them in New York City. So is that why that's why they're staying in New York?
I think the kids are currently in New York, even though the divorce petition was originally filed in Florida, and Florida did have jurisdiction. Under that original Florida order, at least according to Jonas's lawyer, the kids weren't supposed to be removed from Florida, much less the New York or the UK. So I think now both mom and dad agree that New York should retain jurisdiction, at least for the time being, and we'll see what a judge decides. But again, Sophie's going to have to prove that the parents agreed to transfer their home to the UK. Obviously, there's that property they reportedly bought out there. But, if Joe's going to dig in his heels, I think he really has the upper hand here in keeping the kids in New York.
Interesting. All right. Well, moving on to Clayton Echard, he was named in a lawsuit by an anonymous woman who claimed he had gotten her pregnant during a one-night stand on May 20th. So she requested that he take a paternity test ahead of her twins' birth, which is February of next year. She subsequently alleged that Clayton wasn't cooperating and refused her paternity test request, which led him to share the receipts. In an Instagram story post, he confirmed that he had scheduled the paternity test despite his ex's claims. He also alleged that this woman has been coming after other people saying the same thing. But can a court force someone to take a paternity test?
Christina, a court can force someone to take a paternity test, and it's a DNA test. Usually it's a cotton swab. If there's some sort of credible allegation that there were sexual contacts. So unless Clayton is saying, listen, I don't know who this woman is, I never had any sexual relationship with her, but if there's evidence that that relationship occurred, or if Clayton isn't disputing it, he will have to give a paternity test. Judges in courts order them routinely.
If it turns out that he is not the father, can he countersue her for damages, since she was wrong then, if that turns out to be the case?
And anyone can sue for anything, but it's not going to be a good case because really, what are your damages, right? You have to submit to a paternity test. And as long as there's some basis to believe that he may be the father, if it's not completely frivolous or malicious to embarrass him, she thought that, there's a good chance that this is the father. She had a good faith reason for asking the judge to order the paternity test. No judge is going to allow that type of lawsuit to move forward.
Yeah. All right. Well, moving on over to Kourtney Kardashian, she found herself in some hot water after Malibu Mayor Bruce Lee Silverstein called out the city's seemingly preferential treatment of a permit application for a recent Poosh event. So the event in question was called Poolside with Poosh, and it was hosted by Kardashian's wellness website, Poosh. And despite this, he alleges that the event was represented to be a baby shower and that was being hosted by the owner of the property. He told the Poosh team that they needed a special event permit and reported that the unpermitted event to the city's code enforcement department. Well, on the morning of September 22nd, city staff allegedly then told the mayor that they would issue a cease and desist order. After more inquiries followed by radio silence, that same day, a few hours later, he was informed that an emergency expedited special event permit had been granted for the event. So is Kourtney in trouble for this, or is this just the mayor kind of calling her out for her privilege?
Yeah, I don't think Kourtney is going to get in any type of trouble. And, Mayor Silverstein, you should be upset at your city staff. I mean, they're the ones that handled this. Kourtney, whether it happened with a permit and she ultimately got it, if you don't think a permit should have been granted, then you need to talk to the folks that work for the city, whether it's code enforcement or those who are actually issuing these permits, because if anything went wrong, it seems to be on the city's end, not those who are actually throwing this event, because they did eventually get that permit.
Right. Is it really difficult to get an emergency expedited special event permit? So is this something that isn't usually granted to everybody?
I don't think so. It sounds like it's only for emergencies. So I'm not saying it's appropriate in this case when you know that that party is happening. But if truly the permit is for emergency situations, is this really an emergency that you didn't get the permit beforehand or you misrepresented the application? So again, I feel that, if the city truly believed that this was a violation and you did threaten to send a cease and desist, why'd you do a 180 that same day and grant the permit?
Mm-hmm. It's an emergency poosh event, Neama. Why weren't we invited? Moving on over to Kim Zolciak-Biermann. She is making some wild claims. She's made some wild claims in the past, but this might take the cake. So she's making some wild claims about why Kroy's second divorce petition should be dismissed, and they include details about the estranged couple's sex life. So she claims that she is repeatedly sleeping with her estranged husband, with the most recent rendezvous occurring back on September 7th. So he cited that their marriage is irretrievably broken. She disagreed, and she wants the court to dismiss his divorce filings because they are still living together and the marriage is not beyond repair. So what happens if one person in the marriage says that this is still, that this marriage is still alive and well, and the other person is like, absolutely not?
Yeah, so Georgia's a fault-based state, so you can file a fault divorce or a no-fault. So fault would be, if someone was committing adultery, for instance. But you can also file a no-fault divorce and say that the marriage is broken. And that's really what Kroy is alleging here. So, the mere fact that they may still have a sexual relationship doesn't mean that the marriage is not broken. Now, living together is a little bit more challenging. Usually when it comes to a divorce, you want some sort of separation or anticipated separation. But I think most of the time, judges are going to side with the spouse who wants a divorce when that spouse says the marriage is broken and there's irreconcilable differences. Because imagine the alternate universe where a judge says, no, you two need to stay together. You can't get divorced. That would not be good for either party. So obviously we know that, these two have been in an on-again, off-again relationship, but I do think if Kroy is finally willing to move forward, that the judge will grant the divorce.
Right. Does all this back and forth make you think even more that they may have just be dismissing for financial reasons?
Potentially, but here's someone who at least appears to want to go forward with the divorce. If this were, for instance, and I'm not saying that Erica Jane divorced for financial reasons, but a lot of people think that was the case to protect her assets. Well, you're going to want to potentially move forward with the divorce. Let's say one spouse owes a lot of money. The other spouse may want to protect his or her share of the marital assets. So if this were just for financial reasons, I would expect them to move forward with the divorce quickly if, again, one spouse believed that would help them financially, not file, dismiss, file, challenge the filing. I don't think that does anyone any good.
No. I have a feeling we're going to be talking about this a lot more in the upcoming weeks. It's the story that never dies. Neama, thank you so much as always.
Thanks, Christina. See you next week.
See you next week. And remember, everybody, keep commenting, keep subscribing. And like Neama said, we'll see you next week. Bye. For more news, content, and exclusive interviews, make sure to hit the sub, like, and bell button down below and visit usmagazine.com.